Hey guys, to help run the forums, host the website, and travel, we've introduced a universal service fee for in-depth coverage, including this video. My goal is to be unbiased and transparent. It's a privilege to serve you. This is not an endorsement. Let's get into it. How cool is this, you guys? Check it out. We're hanging out at this like secret beach. We got some stand-up paddleboarding action going on. Redondo is just out there, LA, Santa Monica, just such a beautiful, beautiful place. And I love these fat bikes because we get to test them on the beach, and who doesn't want to go to the beach, right? So we're looking at the Bulls Monster ES. I have reviewed their full suspension fat tire bike, but it costs a little bit more. So this one's $48.99. We're staying just below that 5,000 mark. And hardtails are nice in some ways because they've got these rack bosses. So you could set this thing up with the rack and actually haul some cargo. Full suspension, there are some aftermarket racks from like Thule Yakima, I think, that kind of connect to the stays right here. But this is just gonna be a little bit easier of a setup. It also has a rigid seat post, right? So you could swap that out, 30.9 millimeters, and get a full suspension feel. It does have a really nice suspension fork. This is the RockShock Bluto. It's an air fork, so a little bit lighter weight, and it does have remote lockout. So I like that. You could be going on maybe like a pretty flat, pretty hard section of trail or road and lock out the suspension so you're not gonna get the bobbing and stuff. It'll be a little bit more efficient. And then as soon as you're going over some rocks or sand, you can unlock it and you get that nice comfort. The tires here, that's really the star of the show. These are 26 by 4 inches. Schwalbe, they've got the Addix Speed Grip. That's their new rubber Jumbo Jim. Okay, so 26 by 4 inches, and the PSI rating is like 5 to 30. Okay, that's a pretty big range, and 5 is super low. If you're familiar with traditional city bikes and mountain bikes, they usually go down to like maybe 17 is the lowest I've seen on some of the new plus size tires. And you can go fairly low if you're running tubeless, but 5 PSI, it seems really low, but you actually need to go that low if you're on soft sand. And that helps the tire like spread out, and it increases your like traction pad. It doesn't sink in as much, and it allows you to actually steer. I've done this several times. In fact, further up the beach is where we tested the other Bulls models, the full suspension one. So I just wanted to point that out and encourage you to experiment if you get a bike like this, because it might feel like, oh, that's too low. You don't want to get a pinch flat. If you are running that low, be careful about sharp rocks and even ramming into curbs and stuff, because I think you could get a pinch flat. But they are designed to go a little bit lower, and the same goes for snow. Check out these awesome rims, right? They're punched out with those squares, reduces weight, and then they've got that black tire liner. And I think this creates a little bit more give. So there's a nice comfortable feeling as well as that weight savings. Now, while we're back here, I'll just talk about the drivetrain. Shimano Deore XT, it does have the Shadow Plus clutch. That's that little gray lever. So in the down position, shifting is gonna be a little bit easier, smoother, be a lot easier to take the wheel off if you're doing some maintenance. But then when you click it into that up position, it tightens the derailleur, and that's gonna reduce chain bounce and slap. But you can see that they've got this clear plastic sticker right here. It's a slap guard, so you're not nicking up the frame and getting little silver flecks, because this is a 7005 aluminum alloy frame, so you're not gonna get rust or anything. But it's nice that they thought about that. 11 to 40 tooth cassette in the rear, which to me was interesting, because a lot of the other Bulls bikes have had like 11 to 42 or 46. This is a nice step above 11 to 36, which is kind of like an urban, maybe neighborhood range for cassette. So this is a good balance of like off-road, and the taller or the longer sprocket back here is going to make it easy to climb, which is nice when you're on a bigger bike with more friction on those tires and stuff. And you would think, or at least I did, that this would be a fairly heavy electric bike, but it's actually not too bad. 52 pounds, as you see here, right? So there's no fenders, there's no racks or lights or anything to add to the weight, but these tires aren't light. And then the larger rims, and of course the hub spacing here, it's wider, right? Most fat bikes are. So there is more material here, but 52 pounds, I think that comes back to the punched rims and the air fork. So anyway, coming back down here to the drivetrain, we talked about the Shadow Plus clutch and everything, and we've got this nice alloy guard, right? So we'll look down from the top. That's gonna keep your pants and stuff from touching the chain, and it will keep the chain from bouncing all the way off, but there is enough room there that it could possibly bounce to the inside of that actual chain ring. 15 tooth right there. We're looking at the Bosch Performance Line CX motor. This is the mountain bike specific motor from Bosch. It's high torque output. okay, up to 75 Newton meters of torque. And I love how Bulls has integrated it into their frame. They try to keep that as high as possible, I think, to avoid like collision with logs or tall rocks, so like trail strikes. And then the bottom of the motor, you can see that aluminum alloy cover, it's got some like ventilation holes and stuff, and that might help it drain sand or water or whatever. Keep in mind, salt water is never good for you know, like electronics and different materials. A lot of this is aluminum alloy, but there is some steel mixed in. So just, you know, keep that in mind. If you've gone to the beach and you've got tons of sand on your bike, I've heard people say they use like an air compressor to try to blow it off. Also, of course, just water, but don't spray super hard because then it can get into the electronics or into the headset and stuff. A lot of these are sealed. This is a sealed, tapered internal cups. It's nice stuff, right? This is a higher end bike. There are many fat bikes out there, companies like Rad Power Bikes or Volt Bike or whatever, where it's a little bit, it's a different setup, right? You don't have the mid-drive, which is going to be more efficient. Maybe you do have a throttle, which is nice to get started, but it might not be allowed on as many trails and stuff. We're in California, and Class 1 is allowed on mountain biking trails, so that's this, whereas those ones may not be. So this is nicer stuff. You know, you're paying a little bit more, it should hold up better. And you've got things like through axle, so 12 millimeter through axle in the rear with quick release, 15 millimeter axle, maxle that threads in right there on the front. We were talking about the air fork before. It's anodized black, so that's good protection against rocks and stuff, and then it reduces stiction. So this is a nicer fork. A lot of the forks I see on some of the other brands I just mentioned, they're spring forks, so they add the weight and stuff. This is about 100 millimeters of travel. And then, of course, the brakes are also important. We're looking at Magura MT4 and MT5. The MT5 is up front, and it has quad piston caliper, so it's a little bit more surface area, a little bit more power for braking. 180 millimeter rotor, both front and rear, which is decent, right? Like, that's going to give you some pretty good stopping power, which is nice if you're carrying a little bit of extra load. And then, you know, maybe descending. We came from way up there, right? So all the way down, I was using those brakes. They both feel really nice. Like, you can just ease onto them, 2-finger levers, and you really don't need more than 2 fingers. They are adjustable reach, by the way, so you can kind of bring them in if you're wearing gloves or you have smaller hands. So just even with just the front braking power, and that's why they put the quad pistons up there, is because a lot of your weight shifts forward, especially when you're like descending or stopping. You might even get some dive a little bit if you don't have the suspension fork locked out. So a lot of the emphasis is put on that front one. But the point being, they both feel very natural. They don't require a lot of hand effort like a cable brake, like a mechanical disc brake would. And that's what we see on some of the more affordably priced fat bikes, is mechanical versus hydraulic. So this is another big upgrade. And while we're back here, check it out. There's a little sensor from Bosch and a little magnet, so that's measuring your rear wheel speed. And the motor is also listening for pedal cadence and pedal torque over 1,000 times per second. So it's extremely smart and fast, and they're actually measuring your pedal pressure, so like that wave of like press, and then they're listening for little spikes in pressure, which would come from shifting. And when they sense that, it's got something called shift detection, to where it's supposed to back off the motor power a little bit, because remember, up to 75 Newton meters of torque, that's a lot, and they don't want to, you know, stress your chain or bend the little teeth on these sprockets back here. So I think that's pretty nice. That's something that really differentiates Bosch. The trade-off with their motor is that it weighs a little bit more, 8.8 pounds. It's got a slightly larger Q factor, which means it's like wider, but that's not such a big deal on a fat bike that's wide like this anyway. And also that chain ring, 15 tooth, it spins 2.5 revolutions for every single crank revolution. So there's a reduction gear system in there, and it creates a little bit more noise, kind of you can really hear it at the high RPM. And there's a little bit of drag if you're pedaling without the motor active or trying to go beyond 20 miles per hour, 32 kilometers per hour. That's the top speed for a Class 1 electric bike like this. So, you know, all in all, if we just take a step back, but the weight is positioned really well on this bike. It's a reliable, powerful motor. It's got shift detection. It's got a really nice drivetrain. And then the suspension and the 2 frame sizes. So we're on the 46 right here. They've got 1 frame size larger. And I talked about the rigid seat post and maybe swapping that out for suspension to create an even more comfortable ride, but you can dial in the tire pressure too for the terrain. There's a lot you can do with these bikes. It's really and I'm emphasizing that here because I think it's easy to overlook. You're like, yeah, my bike, like it's tuned up, it's ready to go. You can really dial this specific type of bike, fat bikes, in for the conditions. And I am gonna ride out there a little bit later and try to demonstrate that. The tires here aren't too full right now, so we're gonna do some of the sand riding. Okay, so coming up to the grips, these are non-locking, just flat rubber grips. The shifters, it's got two-way high levers, so you can push it or you can pull it, and then like a 4-step low lever. So that makes it's sportier, right? You can shift through the gears faster if you're getting ready to climb, or maybe you're going into some sand and you know you're gonna wanna speed up your pedal cadence so that you don't struggle with the pedal pressure when you're pedaling. Also down here, back to the motor, 120 RPM pedal support, right? So that means you can pedal pretty quickly. If you're doing like you're dumping all those gears, you're getting ready to climb or something like that, you're gonna start pedaling faster, and you don't want the motor to like not be able to keep up with you, because then your speed will fail and you just end up slowing way down. So Bosch does a good job with that. All their Performance Line motors support up to 120 RPM. And then I think, yeah, let's talk about the battery here. So I talked about good weight distribution. This is the Power Pack 500. It's a plastic encased battery that's external, so it's mounted on top of the down tube. Many of the other Bulls models for 2019 and probably beyond are going to the Power Tube, which is a battery it kind of fits into the down tube. A lot of them like click up from below, and maybe they didn't have room for that with these big tires, or maybe it was a cost savings thing. I don't really know, but I'm kind of glad that they stuck with the Power Pack, because a lot of people already have one of these batteries. You can buy them for a lot less money. They have a Power Pack 400, so it's a lower capacity battery that is actually compatible with this interface. So it's a backwards compatible interface. It's got this nice handle built into the top, so it's safe to carry around. A little LED charge level indicator on the side, so you can see how full it is even when it's not mounted to the bike. You can charge it on the bike, but be careful because that's right in the path of the crank arm. The Bosch charger is pretty fast. The one that it comes with is a 4-amp charger, weighs 1.7 pounds. You can stow it in your backpack, and that's the interface I was talking about. So it's pretty big. It's proprietary, so you're not going to mix it up with other chargers. And if you step on it or something, it seems to be fairly durable. The wall side comes unplugged, so it's actually fairly compact too, coming back to like a backpack or whatever. The point I'm trying to make here with all this description is that this battery works really well. It's proven, and it's the same capacity as the new Power Tube. Maybe it doesn't look quite as beautiful, it's not as integrated, but with a black frame like this, I feel like that battery's pretty well hidden. It leaves a little bit of room here if you wanted to try to put a frame bag or something, but they did not have room for bottle bosses. So I don't know, you gotta get a rack or get a Camelback. But the big takeaway is that it's much lighter. 5.7 pounds for the Power Pack 500 versus 6.3, 6.4 pounds for the Power Tube, plus a little bit more weight, ends up being about 7.2 pounds with that alloy shield that I was talking about. So for me, I'd much rather have a lightweight battery like this that's cross-compatible and everything, and I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit on the visuals. Most of the companies are moving towards the Power Tube, and one of the other things about it is that between the bikes, they all have different like interfaces. So Bulls comes from the bottom, Reese and Mueller comes from the top, some of the other ones come from the side, like Trek, versus the Power Pack, it's all the same across all the bikes, and they are interchangeable. So this is maybe the last of this generation, but I think that it's a win. And if you did decide on this bike, I feel like it's easy to justify like the visual compromise here. So coming back up to the cockpit, we talked about the shifters, we talked about the dropper post. It's not a dropper post, it's a lockout, the suspension fork. And now I want to show you the Bosch Purion display panel. Not my favorite, but it does a pretty good job all in all. There's a power button on top. It activates and deactivates very quickly. So I'll just press it one more time here. Boots up, speed, miles per hour, off, that's the pedal assist, and then a battery infographic with 5 dots, just like we had on the side of the battery pack. So each dot is 20%, which isn't very precise. It'd be nice if there were 10 dots, or maybe even just a percentage like 51%, right? I guess they're doing the best they can with the space or whatever. There is a little, while I'm complaining about this display, there's a little port on the side, micro USB, but unfortunately you're not able to tap into that for your own charging needs. That's just for diagnostics and software updates and stuff. To me, that's a missed opportunity because Bosch does have a bigger Intuvia display that would mount right here, and now a kiosk display. They cost more, but they do have an active micro USB port for charging, okay? And those are both removable. This one is not. It can swivel a little bit, but if you've got it really bolted down, it doesn't swivel very easily. So at the bike racks or wherever you're storing this thing, it could get some sun, it could get some rain, and maybe even some scratches. That's one of the trade-offs, but it is compact. At least it frees this up and it looks more like a regular bike until you look down, you see it's not. It's an electric bike with the big battery. So anyway, coming back to the display panel, there are no lights built into this right now, but if there were, you could hold the plus button and then a little light icon would show and it would activate those. And some shops can wire in a light, so that's kind of nice. And if we hold the minus key and tap power, it switches from miles per hour to kilometers per hour. The other thing that just happened is when you hold minus, it cycles through these other trip stats. So we're at trip meter right now, 75 miles. We're back to assist level. Oops, no, there we go. I needed to hold it. Total distance, 76. Range, it can't calculate anything because we're in off mode right now. But if we go to eco, it says, okay, 105 miles of range. Oh, it's in kilometers, that's why. Okay, there we go, tap it. And 65 miles of range. I was like, wow, that's a lot. So it's fairly dynamic. Like the last mile of riding, plus however full the battery is, the Bosch system dynamically calculates and estimates how far it thinks you can go. So in the highest level of assist, it's saying 20 miles. Now that could drop significantly if we were riding in sand and we're really climbing a lot, which, you know, we'll see in the ride test. And if I arrow down once, we get to eMTB mode. That's a special drive mode that is only part of the Bosch Performance Line CX motor. It's basically like a do-everything mode, so if you're mountain biking, you don't have to worry about pressing buttons. You can just focus on shifting gears. And it gives you 120 to 300% output versus like just locking you in at 300 in turbo or keeping you down at 120 for like tour or whatever. So it's a nice mode. It's relying a little bit more on that pedal torque, like I said, and just giving you a lot of like variety without having to think about it. I think it works pretty well. I've become a fan of it, and they did work with like professional mountain bikers and stuff to set that up, and people who are probably a little bit more experienced than me. I'm probably gonna ride test it in eMTB mode just to show you. I'm gonna put the camera on the frame and just get out there for a quick ride. I think that's about it, you guys. So let's do it. I'm just gonna hop on straight away. Oh, by the way, no kickstand, so I was using that rock, but they do have, looks like kickstand provisions right there near the quick release lever. So you could get one. I tend to like having a kickstand, especially if I was using this as like a commuting platform. Maybe I live somewhere where there's a lot of snow and stuff, and I've got my rack and everything. I could use this to get to work. And they do have like some third-party companies that have like little studs that you can put in the tires and just different options, so you could really get around on this thing and have a lot of fun. So here we go. I'm just gonna hop on. Let's see here and take off. Look how fast it responded, right? Like every time I was pedaling, starting and stopping, that motor was like right there when I needed it. And it's feeling pretty stable because, you know, it's fat tires, a lot of surface area. And there's the beach. That's where we're headed. Oh boy. Let's see if I wonder if, yeah, okay. So the suspension is not locked out. The pressure is a little bit high for me, so I'm not getting a lot of travel. And that comes back to an air suspension. You can have this sagged to suit your body weight. There we go. Slowing down. Yeah. I'm pedaling a little bit more slowly here, and the motor isn't, it's going nice and slow to kind of match me, which is exactly what I want. I mean, I don't want to spin out because this soft sand is already kind of coming up and landing on my shoes and stuff, and I don't want to crash. I'm riding one-handed, but this is pretty impressive. You know, we're in soft sand at the beach, and the bike it's not sinking in. It's doing just fine. There we go. No-handed again. This might be a little bit risky because we got the tire tracks. Let's get down to some of that nice wet sand. Nice. When it firms up, it feels really good. Pretty cool, right? Awesome. Just gonna cruise right up over those rocks, downshifting. There we go. Awesome. Okay guys, I like to do these frame shots. We got that 15-tooth chainring. It does not cycle backwards. These just kind of like spin, so be careful. Sometimes I've kicked those and they've like hit me in the shins. We got the chain line right here, 11 to 40 tooth back there on the cassette, and it's an 11 speed, right Barney?
Correct.
Yeah, it is an 11 speed. Okay, cool. And then he was correcting me earlier. He said actually the rear isn't a through axle. It's using a 9mm axle with a quick release gear. So it does have quick release, but only the front is that 15mm through axle. Sorry about that mistake there. I just want to point out when I'm looking down here, it's nice. They've got the black spokes, the black hubs, the black rims. Everything really ties in nicely. And then there are those little bosses for adding a rear rack. I didn't see bosses for adding fenders though. There isn't like a mounting point on the arch of the suspension fork, and there isn't a hole right here. Although I do see two threaded eyelets back here. So maybe it's possible to do one that could connect to like the seat post clamp right here. Lots of possibilities in the world of bicycles. So I'm gonna pedal around, keep an eye on that chain ring as I switch through the gears, listen for shift detection, and just get an idea for how that sounds at the higher RPM. Cool guys, I'm just gonna go for a ride. Barney's gonna film it. Let's have fun. I'm pretty stoked. I was amazed they made it through those rocks and stuff, but if you stand up and you keep your balance, the bigger tires, they just give you that nice balanced feel, stable, and then the motor helps you out, so I didn't have to overexert myself. It was good. I think that's about it, you guys. Just had a blast out here. It's always fun to be in a beautiful location with these bikes and on something that's relatively quiet, sustainable, keeping the beach clean. Everyone's having fun with this. Not a big deal. It'd be a cool way to go surfing, but then again, it's a pretty expensive bike to just lock up on the beach. Keep in mind that, again, the salt water can be kind of corrosive. Have fun out there, ride safe. Chime in if you feel like I missed anything, if you had anything to add. Love you guys. See you next time.